The grounding of the United States naval ship Big Horn on the 23rd of September, 2024, off the coast of Oman, represents far more than a mere maritime navigational mishap. It serves as a glaring, unmistakable strategic warning regarding the immense fragility of the logistical architecture underpinning American naval hegemony in the 21st century. To fully comprehend the gravity of this incident, one must analyze not only the specific tactical circumstances of the grounding itself but also the broader operational, historical, and geopolitical contexts that transformed what might have been a routine maritime accident into a severe vulnerability for the United States Central Command. The USNS Big Horn, carrying the hull classification symbol TU-198, is a Henry J. Kaiser-class fleet replenishment oiler operated by the Military Sealift Command, an organization tasked with providing vital logistical support to the fighting ships of the United States Navy. When the Big Horn ran aground in the Arabian Sea, it sustained substantial damage to its stern, specifically involving the rudder post and significant water ingress into its engineering spaces, necessitating its removal from operational status and a tow by commercial tugboats to a drydock facility in Dubai for extensive evaluation and repair. The sheer significance of this event stems directly from the fact that at the time of its grounding, the USNS Big Horn was the absolute sole replenishment oiler assigned to support the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, which had been deployed to the volatile Middle Eastern theater to project power, deter Iranian aggression, and provide a stabilizing presence amidst the ongoing, brutal conflict between Israel and Hamas, as well as the escalating cross-border warfare involving Hezbollah and Lebanon and the persistent, disruptive maritime attacks orchestrated by Houthi militants in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The operational mechanics of a modern carrier strike group dictate an insatiable, continuous demand for liquid logistics. While the centerpiece of the strike group, the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, is propelled by twin nuclear reactors that granted effectively unlimited range regarding its own propulsion, the massive air wing it carries operates under entirely different physical constraints. The carrier air wing, comprising dozens of F/A-18E, F Super Hornets, F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, and EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft, consumes millions of gallons of JP-5 aviation fuel during high-tempo flight operations. Furthermore, the carrier is surrounded by a protective screen of Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers and potentially Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers, all of which are powered by gas turbine engines that devour immense quantities of F-76 marine diesel fuel. Without a fleet replenishment oiler like the Big Horn to conduct underway replenishment, a complex, highly specialized maneuver where two ships steam side by side at a matched speed while tensioned hoses transfer hundreds of thousands of gallons of volatile fuel across the open ocean, the operational radius and endurance of the strike group collapsed dramatically. When the Big Horn was crippled off the coast of Oman, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was effectively tethered, facing a sudden and severe logistical crisis. The escorting destroyers, deprived of their floating gas station, would be forced to detach from the strike group and travel to friendly regional ports to refuel, a process that removes vital air defense and anti-submarine warfare assets from the carrier's protective screen, leaving the high-value nuclear carrier more vulnerable to adversary anti-access and area denial weapon systems, including the anti-ship ballistic missiles frequently employed by the Houthi forces in neighboring Yemen. The Henry J. Kaiser-class oilers, of which the Big Horn is a prominent example, are aging assets that trace their conceptual and physical origins back to the late 20th century, with the Big Horn itself being constructed at the Avondale shipyards and entering service in the early 1990s. One of the most critical and controversial aspects of the USNS Big Horn's design is that it is a single-hulled vessel. Following the catastrophic Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989, the international maritime community and the United States government, through the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, mandated the transition of commercial oil tankers to double-hull designs to mitigate the environmental devastation caused by groundings and collisions. However, military auxiliary vessels were largely grandfathered in or exempted from these stringent commercial requirements due to the immense cost of replacing the existing fleet. Consequently, the United States Navy continues to operate several single-hulled oilers in highly contested and environmentally sensitive waters. The grounding of the Big Horn in the Arabian Sea carried the terrifying potential for a massive ecological disaster. Had the jagged seabed penetrated the primary cargo tanks rather than just the aft engineering spaces, thousands of tons of marine diesel and aviation fuel could have poured into the ocean, creating an environmental catastrophe that would have severely damaged diplomatic relations with the Sultanate of Oman and provided a massive propaganda victory to regional adversaries who constantly seek to portray the United States military presence as a destructive and destabilizing force in the Middle East. Fortunately, the damage was localized to the steering gear and engineering compartments, preventing a catastrophic fuel leak, but the incident starkly illuminated the inherent risks of relying on legacy, single-hulled logistical platforms in modern operational environments. To mitigate the immediate crisis caused by the sudden absence of the USNS Big Horn, the United States Navy was forced into a reactive posture, scrambling to secure alternative logistical arrangements. Because the Military Sealift Command's fleet is stretched incredibly thin across the globe, with other oilers committed to the Indo-Pacific theater to counter Chinese maritime expansion or to the Atlantic to support European allies, there was no readily available military oiler to seamlessly take the Big Horn's place in the Fifth Fleet area of responsibility. Consequently, the Navy was forced to rely on the commercial charter market, contracting a United States-flagged commercial tanker operated by U.S. Marine Management to fill the void. While this stopgap measure prevented the immediate grounding of the carrier air wing and kept the destroyers fueled, it highlighted a profound weakness. Commercial tankers, even those flagged in the United States, are not purpose-built for the rigorous, highly specialized demands of underway replenishment. They often lack the specific tensioned wire rig systems, the high-capacity pumping infrastructure, and the specialized communication suites required to safely and efficiently transfer fuel to warships pitching and rolling in heavy seas while maintaining tactical speeds. Furthermore, the reliance on commercial charters incurs exorbitant financial costs, often commanding rates significantly above standard market value due to the elevated risk of operating in proximity to conflict zones like the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, draining the Navy's operational budget to fulfill a basic logistical necessity that should be handled by dedicated military assets. The Big Horn incident must be analyzed as a symptom of a much deeper, systemic disease afflicting the United States Navy's logistical enterprise, specifically the Military Sealift Command. The MSC is uniquely structured, relying not on active-duty military personnel, but on civilian mariners, highly trained merchant sailors who operate the auxiliary fleet. For years, the maritime industry and naval analysts have warned of a severe, cascading crisis regarding the recruitment and retention of these civilian mariners. The demanding operational tempo, extended deployments away from home, administrative burdens, and the immense stress of operating aging, maintenance-heavy vessels have led to a critical shortfall in qualified personnel. The situation has become so dire that the Navy has frequently been forced to place vital logistical ships into reduced operating status simply because they cannot crew them. The grounding of the Big Horn exacerbates this crisis. It places additional strain on the remaining operational vessels and their exhausted crews, creating a vicious cycle of overwork and deferred maintenance that virtually guarantees future operational failures. The ships themselves are suffering from decades of chronic underfunding and delayed recapitalization. While the Navy is slowly introducing the new John Lewis class of fleet replenishment oilers, which feature double hulls and modernized systems, the procurement rate has been sluggish, hampered by a shrunken domestic shipbuilding industrial base that struggles to deliver vessels on schedule and within budget. The United States currently possesses only a fraction of the shipbuilding capacity it wielded during the Cold War, meaning that replacing an aging ship like the Big Horn or repairing it after a severe grounding is a painfully slow and resource-intensive process. The strategic implications of this logistical fragility extend far beyond the immediate tactical confines of the Middle East. While the inability to efficiently refuel a single carrier strike group off the coast of Oman is a serious tactical inconvenience, the exact same logistical vulnerabilities, if exposed during a high-end, peer-state conflict in the vast expanses of the Indo-Pacific, would be absolutely catastrophic. Military analysts universally agree that any potential conflict with the People's Republic of China over the fate of Taiwan or dominance in the South China Sea would be defined primarily by the tyranny of distance. The Pacific Ocean is unimaginably vast, and the United States would be forced to project and sustain massive naval and air forces across thousands of miles of contested water. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy and its associated rocket forces have spent the last 2 decades meticulously developing a sophisticated anti-access, area denial architecture specifically designed to sever the United States' logistical lifelines. If the United States Navy currently struggles to maintain a single, operational oiler in the relatively confined waters of the Middle East during a period of heightened tension but short of direct, total war, the prospect of sustaining dozens of warships across the Pacific while under constant threat from hypersonic anti-ship missiles, attack submarines, and long-range bombers is deeply alarming. The Big Horn incident essentially provided a free, highly visible case study for adversary war planners, demonstrating unequivocally that the most efficient way to neutralize an American aircraft carrier is not necessarily to attack the heavily defended carrier itself, but to sink, disable, or merely disrupt the slow, lightly armed, aging auxiliary ships that provide the essential fuel required for the carrier to function as a weapon of war. Historically, the United States Navy pioneered the concept of underway replenishment precisely to overcome the limitations of distance. During the Second World War, the creation of the massive logistical fleet train allowed the Fast Carrier Task Force to operate continuously across the vast Pacific, launching relentless strikes against the Japanese Empire without needing to constantly return to distant bases like Pearl Harbor. This logistical supremacy was arguably the decisive factor in the naval war in the Pacific. However, in the post-Cold War era, driven by budget cuts and a shift in focus toward land-based conflicts in the Middle East, the Navy allowed its maritime logistical capabilities to atrophy. The focus shifted entirely to the lethal end of the spear, procuring incredibly advanced, expensive combatants like the Ford-class aircraft carriers and the F-35 fighter, while neglecting the unglamorous but absolutely essential shaft of the spear, the auxiliary fleet. The grounding of the USNS Big Horn is the inevitable culmination of decades of strategic neglect. Furthermore, this maritime logistical crisis is compounded by the loss of critical shore-based infrastructure. The catastrophic fuel leaks at the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility in Hawaii, which contaminated the drinking water of thousands of military families, forced the Department of Defense to permanently close the massive, subterranean fuel depot. This closure stripped the military of its most important strategic fuel reserve in the Pacific, forcing the Navy to rely even more heavily on distributed, afloat fuel storage provided by the very tanker fleet that is currently strained to the breaking point. The loss of Red Hill means that the auxiliary ships are no longer just delivering fuel from a massive central hub to the fleet. They are increasingly required to act as floating storage themselves, tying up vital maritime assets and further reducing the flexibility and resilience of the logistics network. The visual evidence that emerged following the Big Horn's grounding rapidly circulated across maritime forums like G-Captain and various social media platforms, painted a grim picture of the ship's condition. Photographs clearly showed the massive rudder post severely misaligned, indicating that the immense physical forces generated by the ship's momentum striking the seabed had violently wrenched the steering mechanism out of its structural housing. Accompanying video footage revealed alarming water ingress into the lower engineering spaces, a terrifying prospect for any mariner, but particularly for a single-hulled vessel carrying thousands of tons of volatile liquid fuel. The fact that the crew managed to contain the flooding and prevent a complete loss of the vessel or an environmental catastrophe speaks to the high level of training and professionalism of the civilian mariners operating the ship, but their heroic damage control efforts cannot mask the systemic failure that placed them in such a precarious situation. The subsequent towing of the crippled giant to Dubai by commercial salvage tugs served as a humiliating visual metaphor for a superpower struggling to maintain its foundational maritime infrastructure. The repair process in Dubai will likely be lengthy and incredibly expensive, pulling dry dock resources and engineering expertise away from other critical maintenance tasks. More importantly, it removes a vital asset from the global chessboard at a time when the United States can ill afford to lose a single drop of its logistical capacity. In analyzing the broader historical and geopolitical trajectory of American naval power, the USNS Big Horn incident must be recorded not as a footnote, but as a critical inflection point. It is a moment that demands a fundamental reassessment of naval priorities. The doctrine of power projection is entirely meaningless if the physics of fuel consumption and the harsh realities of maritime logistics cannot be satisfied. A multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier, equipped with the most advanced radar systems and stealth fighters ever conceived by human engineering, is reduced to nothing more than a highly vulnerable, stationary artificial reef if it cannot be consistently, reliably, and securely supplied with the aviation fuel and marine diesel required to operate. The United States must urgently revitalize its domestic shipbuilding industry, heavily invest in the rapid procurement of modern, double-hulled logistical vessels like the John Lewis class, and fundamentally restructure the incentive programs and working conditions for the civilian mariners of the Military Sealift Command to ensure a robust, highly skilled workforce. Furthermore, naval planners must develop entirely new, distributed logistical concepts, moving away from relying on a small number of massive, highly vulnerable single points of failure like the Big Horn, and toward a more resilient, decentralized network of autonomous or semi-autonomous refueling platforms that can survive the highly contested environments of future conflicts. The grounding off the coast of Oman was a stark, undeniable warning shot fired not by an enemy, but by the unforgiving laws of physics and the consequences of strategic neglect. It remains to be seen whether the naval establishment will heed this warning and implement the massive, structural reforms necessary to secure the logistical foundation of the fleet, or whether the Big Horn will merely be remembered as the initial harbinger of a catastrophic logistical collapse in a future, far more devastating maritime conflict. I am fully prepared to offer an exhaustive, highly detailed analysis regarding the historical evolution of the Military Sealift Command, the specific engineering parameters of the incoming John Lewis-class fleet replenishment oilers, or the intricate logistical demands of carrier aviation in contested environments should you require such information to further expand your understanding of this critical subject.